the newsagents.
His name is Elon Musk. He saved free speech. He created so many different great things. Where is he? Come on up here, Elon. He created the first major American car company in generations, and his rocket company is the only reason we can now send American astronauts into space. Come here. Take over, Elon. Yes, take over.
As you can see, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA.
Dark MAGA, says Elon Musk at a Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. As if somehow there is something more to MAGA than just winning elections. It's fighting in a way that hasn't been fought before. We've heard of billionaires giving money to a campaign. What happens when they're lending their algorithm?
Elon Musk is now one of Trump's biggest, most influential backers in the world. And he's offering to pay voters to vote for Trump. Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And Elon Musk has sort of been on a journey. He was trying to
Before you go any further, when was the last time you lent your algorithm to anybody?
I don't have an algorithm.
Do you not?
I don't have a social media platform that I can use in the way that Musk. So when Musk was speaking in Pennsylvania, what was the top thing on the X platform?
Was it Elon Musk speaks at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania?
How did you guess that so immediately?
Psychic.
Yeah.
But go on about the journey, because I like the journey. The journey is exactly what we want to hear.
The journey took him as a Democrat supporter, and then he becomes Ron DeSantis' man. And if you remember, there was the ill-fated launch of Ron DeSantis' campaign against Donald Trump because Elon Musk thought that Trump was deeply flawed. And now you have got Elon Musk all in with Donald Trump and saying in terms, if Donald Trump doesn't win the election, I'm and I'll be in prison.
It's like a little dog scamping around trying to find the right owner, isn't it? It's like he tried really hard with Ron DeSantis. Like Ron DeSantis was going to be the guy that pushed Donald Trump off the top spot. And then the Twitter collapse was embarrassing for, I think, both of them. Arguably pushed Ron DeSantis' own chances back about, 6 years. And so Elon Musk then transfers this allegiance, this sort of hungry little puppy allegiance, to the thing that is going to be the right one. It's quite odd listening to him talk at those rallies because he's parroting the language that Donald Trump has already used. Donald Trump says, if we don't win this, this is going to be the last election ever. And then Donald Trump goes on to say, I heard somewhere that if we don't win this, this will be the last election ever. It was him that said it. And now Elon Musk is now parroting what his kind of owner is saying about freedom of speech and about the importance of winning this election. And you get the sense of a sort of a little man who has been slightly bullied, suddenly becoming friends with the bully. That's the overriding image.
Cool kids.
Yeah.
He's been shunned in the playground by himself. No one would play with him, and now
But he doesn't need to do that. No. He's incredibly powerful. So why is he acting like this?
But aren't there two things going on here? I mean, one is Musk himself, right, who is clearly an absolute oddball, a complete freak, and is becoming more and more freakish over time, right? We could see that. The good question is whether he believes it or not, but there's a very strong sense that he has been radicalised, potentially by his own content and by the content that he himself
he just reads.
It's just this meta thing. He changes the algorithm and he goes, yeah, that's a good point, we should change it some more, and it just sort of goes on and on and on.
This was a great point I wrote.
Yeah, exactly. He's reinforced by his own website. So there's that, him personally, and going down the road of a not inconsiderable number of sort of slightly odd, deeply frustrated late middle-aged men, and in indulging with MAGA and odd political forces. But there's also a thing about big tech, right? It's a bigger story about big tech, and it's not just Musk, but people like Zuckerberg as well, who, having initially everyone sort of associated them with the Democrats and thinking that Silicon Valley and the kind of liberal left...
You're opening up the world.
Yeah. Silicon Valley and liberal tech were kind of one and the same, and that, you had people, a sort of revolving door from like people who'd worked for the Obama administration go and work in Silicon Valley. Nick Clegg, of course, famously went and worked for Facebook, now Meta, and Musk himself, as John said, endorsed Biden in 2020. But of course, we know what's happened since then with the Biden administration, right? Which is that Biden, they believe, has turned on big tech. He's talked about breaking up monopolies. He's talked about giving uses extra data security. He's talked about constraining AI research, or at least making sure the state has better oversight. And guess what? These very rich, very powerful people don't like it.
Yeah,
they
but
don't
on the
like
other
it
side, the Democrats have also given him massive subsidies towards electric vehicles, right? So it depends which hat he's wearing. If you want to go down the Tesla route and the green route and the kind of, I'm going to rewrite history, the history of the American car in the greatest
Trump
way
is going to
since
slash
Ford.
their taxes again. But a judge did that quite good clip, didn't he? On I can't remember which show it was a few weeks ago, when he was asked, why do you think it is that Musk and Silicon Valley are increasingly kind of Republican oriented? And he was like, it's not hard. They're really rich. They want to get richer.
Yeah.
And the Republicans are promising, and Trump is promising to make them richer.
But he's been promised a job inside
Yes.
the cabinet. I mean, I think that's it's a vanity thing at that point.
Yes.
He's going to do better from a Trump presidency in terms of his wealth, probably, but he's also going to very much enjoy being the guy round the table. I mean, that's what we've seen he enjoys doing now, right?
And just one other thing to kind of put into the economic mix here, that Trump has said that he will impose 200% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles that are built in Mexico. And the biggest car manufacturer in China is BYD, and their cars are coming across the border in huge numbers. Well, who would stand to gain most from a 200% tariff on Chinese-built EVs coming into America? And it's not that difficult to join the dots. And although Elon Musk is sort of slowly killing Twitter, or X as he now calls it, with user numbers down a third in the UK, 20% in the US, he's still got an awful lot of people looking at it. Yeah. There are still huge numbers of people who are getting information from him on it. And not only has it become a platform on which a ton of falsehood and fakery and conspiracy theories are being pushed out, a lot of them are being pushed out by him. A lot of them are being pushed out by Elon Musk.
As we saw of the protests in the UK. Next week, Starmer, they're hosting their first tech conference on the 14th. Who's not invited? Musk, right? Which I think reflects the sense that Labour has of the danger that he presents and the fact he's fallen out of favour, actually, with many people here in the UK.
I mean, just look at some of the content that he's been promoting just in the last few days. I mean, he's been saying, the owner of this platform, with enormous influence to determine what we all see and what parts of the news agenda are, has been saying this election is probably going to be the last election if the Democrats win. Because he's basically suggesting that the Democrats will change voter laws in such a way as to allow illegal immigrants to vote, and all of these sorts of things. That basically it will be the last democratic election that there is, right?
The line that he got from Trump. Let's have a listen.
If Trump doesn't win this election, it's the last election we're going to have. The Democrats, the Dem machine, has been importing so many people, bringing in so many illegals, flying in with this CBP border app thing. They're transporting large numbers of illegals to swing states. If you look at the numbers, these are the numbers from the government website.
I just don't think we've ever really confronted anything quite like this before. I mean, John, as you say, Twitter X, it's declining in terms of its influence because it has become so odd and so jaundiced and so obviously kind of much less of a good news aggregator than it was. But it still remains influential and it still remains dominant in the kind of news aggregator space. There is no one that has come along to replace it. And I don't think we've ever had a news source which has been so openly controlled. The irony, of course, he's saying that he's opened it up and freed it up and allowed anyone to say what they want, but has been so openly controlled and influenced by someone who is quite so eccentric. We've had news magnates before who have controlled newspapers, which have been very, very influential, but none of them have had such a monopoly as on the kind of medium that it is that Twitter has. And I think this is basically the subtext to all of this, right? Which is that he knows, and they all know, that the Democratic Party, there is a mood growing and has been for a long time in the Democratic Party, which is starting to consider this era with the tech barons to be like the robber barons of the 1920s, or organizations and monopolies that were so massive and so powerful in American politics in the 1920s that in the end it took a president to break it up. Teddy Roosevelt with the antitrust laws at that time, because he said these companies are too powerful, they have a monopoly, they're controlling politics, they're making various different elements of our politics corrupt. And there is a mood in the Democratic Party which is getting more and more of the view that the tech companies are basically the same sort of organisations in our day. And they all know that, and they all know what's coming if there's a Democratic majority in Congress.
I think that's a very big thought for what's happening now. And I think it's a big thought from... What I mean is...
He's got a very big brain.
No, I think it's too ideological, actually. That's what I'm saying. I think the Democrats would say that actually under the Obama administration, they failed to get a sense of the threat of big tech, actually. And... he was slightly too embracing, and others after him, of all the wonders that big tech could do, and he didn't actually come down on them hard enough. And I think it's not just the Dems. I think a lot of Americans are kind of going, why wasn't that seen more readily? Yes. And if we're coming up to an age of AI, how can we not make the same mistake again? But I think the place that Elon Musk has got to right now is not just to do with him being, potentially a threat in terms of big tech, but the kind of things he's suggesting now, which is, as we said at the very beginning, $47 to refer every voter who signs up in the swing states. So for every person, this is what he wrote on X. I mean, it plays to your point that obviously he's got a very loud voice, right? For every person you refer to as a swing state voter, you get $47. Easy money. If Trump is elected, he'd be the 47th president of the US. That's how he came to his $47. But 47 is actually a pretty generous amount.
Yeah,
if you think you can just run round getting your friends in these swing states to sign up to vote. And I guess the question is, for somebody who sort of talks about election interference, hilariously, is that interference?
Well, it must be as close as you can come.
John, don't you think, I was going to ask you, I mean, obviously you covered 16. Don't you think and 20? The biggest difference, it seems to me, in many ways, or one of the biggest differences in this campaign, is that this alliance with Musk, right? Because Trump never had any established media organisation.
He had a huge following on Twitter.
Yes.
But he didn't have Elon Musk with all his followers and the ability to manipulate the algorithm and decide what goes to the top each time.
He had Fox.
He had Fox News. And the other thing, just to your point, Lewis, about the sort of the comparison to the robber barons, these were powerful people in America. Musk's power is global, and other countries around the world, as Britain was thinking when the riots were taking place and Elon Musk was pumping out his stuff, and I've heard various theories about who was feeding him the information that led to the tweets they were British on the right politicians, agitators, troublemakers who were feeding him the information that he was then putting out without any checks at all. And you see Brazil trying to wrestle with how you manage, social media companies that think they are above the law, and
because they stopped.
Yes,
X
because they stopped
in
X.
Brazil.
Yeah, and you look at what happened in Australia, where it was Facebook that was kind of, and the way that Facebook was behaving. It's very, very difficult to get a grip on companies that have transnational power on an epic scale. And that is what Musk is doing, and he is doing everything. This is completely different, of a different order to the millions that might have been shoveled into the Democrats from Sheldon Adelson or the Koch brothers or whoever the family happened to be.
But does one cross a legal barrier? I mean, if he gave a lot of money to Trump, in a super PAC, is that any different to paying voters individually?
Well,
I don't know the answer.
You're not going to a polling station and saying, here's $47 for voting for Donald Trump. What you're doing is the $47 is to find someone who isn't registered to vote, who would vote Trump.
Yeah, it's like Herbalife. I mean, Avon. It's like
I bet you his lawyers.
Musk is the Avon lady.
Yeah. I bet you his lawyers have been over it and said, this is as close as you can go to the line. Go a step further and you tip over.
It's no different to what Taylor Swift is doing when she says, sign up.
No, it is different because Taylor Swift is not.
She's not offering money.
She's not giving a financial inducement.
So is a financial inducement the thing that then makes this illegal?
I'm sure it will end up being litigated.
Yes. I mean, there's going to be so much litigation. We've already heard about the tens of thousands of poll watchers that the Republican Party is employing across the 50 states, in inverted commas, to check that polling is fair, but also to act as a force of intimidation about, to drive down voter turnout in some areas where you think the Democrats are going to do well, drive up voter turnout in the strong Republican areas. And they're trying to put their thumb on the scales to tip it so that the election works for them.
Yeah, illegal is not necessarily a turn-off in Trump world. As we know, a man with 34 convictions. And
Even better.
Yeah, and Elon Musk talking here about the fact he probably will end up going to jail.
If he loses, man, what? You're fucked, dude.
I'm fucked. If he loses, I'm fucked.
It does seem that way. You can't just be like,
Yeah, I'm like, how long do you think my prison sentence is going to be? Do you think?
Because they kind of throw everything off as if it's lawfare now, as if it's just a political move by the other side, a sort of chess move to lock up your opponents.
And it's more than that, isn't it? It's about Musk there is speaking for a breed of very powerful people, usually very rich, very influential men, this would include Trump as well, who they have to, in order to make their politics work, they have to constantly feed a persecution complex narrative. Absolutely. They have to constantly suggest, no, it's not us that we're not the powerful ones. No, it's not us. We're not powerful despite our tens of billions of dollars and our massive companies.
We're going to end up being the victims.
Armies of lawyers. We're the victims. And it's them out to get us. And that is just an absolutely classic example of that phenomenon.
So just to give you an example of how Musk believes that he is above the law. Last Thursday, he was meant to be interviewed as required by a federal court over his takeover of X. Lawyers travelled from the SEC to Los Angeles to meet him, and he just decides, I can't be bothered. I'm not going to go. And he doesn't turn up for the meeting. And then they had to reissue kind of, you've got to turn up for this meeting. It really matters. And it's a kind of just, I don't care. I'm too important. I'm bigger than the law in this country. I am Elon Musk.
Well, also, what we've seen with the court cases is that once you raise the spectre of politicisation, right, he can turn around and say, they're just coming after me because I was on a platform with Donald Trump. It's lawfare. They're coming after me. It's, as Lewis would say, the persecution complex. Is he a turn-on for voters? I mean, has Trump subtly replaced J.D. Vance as his go-to man with Elon Musk?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that J.D. Vance is the more acceptable face, an easier public face. I think that Elon Musk is such a weirdo that, I think that he has this polarising effect on people. I was at a conference where he spoke at the end of March, and it was mesmerising because I kept on fluctuating between thinking genius, evil, totally frigging nuts. Because there were some times where he would be saying stuff and you think, oh my God, he really has thought this through, and he is unbelievably clever and phenomenal brain power and kind of visionary. And then you hear him saying conspiratorial crap and you think, oh my God, this is crazy. And you hear a bit about how he lives, which he talked a bit about, not being able to sleep at night and all the rest of it and why. And you think, oh my God, he's, just a very weird individual. And I think all those things are, and that makes him not an ideal political surrogate.
And he doesn't have Trump's kind of machismo or sort of charm in a way. But there is an element of, the thing that we can never quite understand over here, right, even now, is the extent to which Americans, particularly kind of less political Americans, still associate Trump with wealth and success and think that strength and Musk, for all of his weirdness and frailties and freakishness, again, he's even far richer than Trump. He has those components to him as well. So I suppose there is an element of sort of self-reinforcement of the Trump brand by being associated with someone like that, for good or ill. So we are 3 weeks now from the first Labour budget for 15 years. A budget that has been delayed, perhaps a mistake, but a budget has been delayed till the end of October. And right now, there are furious negotiations back and forth between the Treasury and the different departments about the money they're going to get over the next year, and concurrently also preparation for a spending review, which will determine it over a multi-year horizon. It's the first big opportunity for Rachel Reeves, beyond the winter fuel payment, to actually say, what is this government about? And we've seen sort of various iterations over the last few weeks and months about what we think it's going to be about. Initially, we thought it sounded like it was going to be a very hair shirt budget. because Starmer said that things were going to get worse before they get better. But over the last few weeks, partly in response to the political troubles they've had, we've seen Reeves and the Treasury, as we've talked about on this show, start to give little hints that maybe this budget will be about borrowing to invest. There's news today that sort of reminds us just how hard that budget potentially is going to be, and it is getting harder, which is that over the last few days, UK borrowing costs have been climbing as a result of investors basically pricing British debt more highly. It's now reached a 3-month high, or the highest since the election, the biggest gap between UK and German borrowing costs for a year. And even though these increases might not sound like much, it's up by about 0.4%. Every 1/10 of a percentage point increase in borrowing costs for the government makes the room for manoeuvre for Reeves to borrow, to fund the things she wants to do, that much harder. So there is some worry and trepidation about it within Downing Street.
Interestingly enough, the IPPR, who is a sort of Labour-friendly think tank, has come out today and said that changing the fiscal rules could actually unlock more than £50 billion for investment. And they've said a more rigorous measurement of public sector net worth is crucial for what they call long-term sustainable growth. This has been backed by Jim O'Neill, sort of Tory-friendly economist, and I think Rachel Reeves will use that. And what I'm hearing from people who've been, part of the Downing Street machine is that actually the missteps over the summer, all the Sue Gray stuff, all the clothing, all the, the freebie stuff, means that there is more pressure on Reeves now to be radical, to come up with something that is properly eye-catching, because they can't just sort of let people sort of live with this narrative of 3 months of chaos and what have you actually done. And given that all she's talked about is growth, she's come in saying growth, 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 there is no option, this person told me, for her now but to set out a hefty investment plan. I asked what that figure looked like, and they said, well, the IPPR is speaking about headroom of 50 billion. She's not going to go near that, but it could be 20 billion or, for old time's sake, maybe 28 billion, something that looks properly like an offering. She has to get the backbenchers back on side after what they're calling the idiotic winter fuel move. Think it was cack-handed, and they've got to start the reset.
But she's also got to please, in the mix of this, and this is the balancing act that every chancellor has to do, she also has to please the OBR, that these figures add up, and the IFS, that these are kind of, that this is sane and that this is proper accounting and is not just some sort of Mickey Mouse scheme to find money down
Under
the back
the bed.
of the sofa. Because credibility in the markets is also essential. I mean, what you feel listening to some of the debates that are going on is that, for 14 years, the Tories have been applying stealth taxes wherever they can, clever ruses to take your money in the hope that you won't notice that the money has gone. And it's probably, once you've ruled out income tax and all the rest of it, national insurance, it's pretty difficult to find ways of taxing people that are going to be effective.
I think this is the problem that Reeves has actually, a vice that she's put herself in, which is twofold. Why are borrowing costs going up today in the last few days? Some of it is to do with just sort of complex reasons around interest rates rising at different rates in different countries that we need not go into. Some of it, doubtless, though, is being fueled by some investor anxiety, market anxiety, about this relatively sudden shift to the idea of the government potentially borrowing quite a lot more by changing its fiscal rules, i.e. potentially excluding capital borrowing for investments from day-to-day borrowing for day-to-day spending, which, by the way, a lot of economists think is a really good idea. It is a good idea. There is a difference. You'll understand, if you buy...
Borrow to invest.
Yeah, exactly. If you yourself at home, if you buy a car that enables you to go to work, or you borrow to buy a car that enables you to go to work, that's better than just borrowing to just spend on day-to-day spending, right? Because it's helping you make more money over the long term. So that's important. But there has doubtless been a shift. What Reeves did was fetishise the Jeremy Hunt fiscal rules, which she was saying that she was doing in order to get credibility. Okay, fine. But she did it at the same time, John, as doing what you said, which is to basically rule out before the election changing or pulling on any of the main levers to raise revenue.
I mean, she did actually rule that out.
She ruled out almost, income tax VAT, all
No, but she
the rest
also
of
ruled
it.
out a change to the way that they account.
Indeed so. And so, as a result of being somewhat unclear, or at least shifting quite quickly, on the fiscal rules, there is the potential to introduce some instability and anxiety on the markets, which reduces your room for manoeuvre, as opposed to perhaps at the very beginning making a stronger argument and preparing the way, rolling the pitch for changes on the fiscal rules and borrowing to invest earlier, making a much clearer sense, or giving a much clearer sense earlier that what we're about is borrowing to invest. So I think if there are problems in the markets, or are problems over the next few days and weeks, part of it will be because Reeves herself has been somewhat opaque and actually rather kind
but
of
I think the
somewhat
reason for
opaque
that
on those rules.
is because some of the places she thought she'd find tax rises were frankly on taxing the rich. And
it's
there
not
has
working.
there has been a backlash, and you might say, oh, you know, it was always going to sound like this, of people, you know, let's call them wealth creators. I know you'll laugh when I say that. But if people start saying you are making it impossible for us to actually do our job, to invest in this country, to, you know, hire more people, all the rest of it, then she is nervous about scaring them off. And she might want to stick two fingers up to people saying that, but fundamentally she needs Britain to be an attractive place to invest, because she's literally staked her career on promising us growth. So if those, you know, changes, for example, to private equity taxation, there was at one point this idea of a 45% tax, you know, that's gone. Changes to the non-dom status, not as rigorous as it was going to be, that's gone. She doesn't want to be the Labour Chancellor that has scared off the people who are going to help this economy grow. Therefore, all she's left with is big borrowing.
Yeah. One area where potentially, let's see what happens, where potentially they have been utterly brilliant, is on the threats of capital gains tax. You talk to any kind of, you know, financial managers, wealth advisors or whatever, they're all reporting this incredible spike in, you know, people giving gifts to their children or whatever.
Because everyone thinks it's coming.
Because they think that capital gains tax is going to be raised to, you know, the level of the highest rate of marginal tax. So they think, Christ, I've got the family farm. I literally met a farmer who has gifted his farm to his 3 children. It's worth millions. There will be a huge capital gains tax bill to pay. By doing this, the Treasury is getting a huge spike in revenues.
So she doesn't do anything in October.
Well, she might not, and still raise billions of pounds. Now that is clever.
I think what they're being left with, and Emily, what you say is exactly right, which is the main revenue raises they suggested, whether it's VATs on private schools or changes in pension provision or non-doms. It's very clear that the initial fiscal projections suggest they will either raise less money than they thought, or in some cases, no money whatsoever. So again, boxed in. And so then they're left with, I mean, I was told that, you know, Treasury and Treasury ministers and officials are sort of scrambling around trying to find even quite small changes that might raise some money. You know, I was told there's a suggestion that, for example, they might emulate what the Welsh government has done and increase taxes on second homes to 300% council tax. Things like this, that they can do quickly and that can raise money. There's almost no way of avoiding doing that. So things like that.
There's been a massive backlash in Wales where they've done that, because they've suddenly realised that the people who buy second homes are not the same people as the people who live in the towns of, you know, Denbigh and Gower and all the rest of it, where there's huge pressure on, you know, housing.
But I think that is likely to be in it nonetheless. And I think talking to someone who's familiar with some of the spending negotiations going on, they say that, you know, given the revenue projections are where they are, and any revenue from growth is by definition going to take a long time. This person said to me, you know, some of this stuff, some of the backlash on this stuff from Labour MPs is going to be bloody. Particularly, they said, you know, take a look at, just keeping your eye out on the day for what is happening with local government, the amount that local government is getting. And they said, you know, frankly, in terms of kind of what we're giving, we think the reaction from local government is going to be, frankly, we're not going to be able to keep the lights on with this settlement the way it's going. You know, parts of this budget, it seems to me, are going to feel, you know, very much like something that we would have expected from the George Osborne days in terms of some of the settlement on areas, though not all, some areas of public spending. And I think it will be a jolt for quite a few Labour MPs.
Before we get to the budget, there's one other thing which I was told, which is that they are looking now to have a real eye-catching move on standards. You know, they have to reset the whole standards and ethics thing. And one thing that has been mooted is this idea that the ethics advisor, Laurie Magnus, would be able to go ahead with his own investigations. Instead of, you know, a la Boris Johnson days, where Boris Johnson set the parameters and said, you can only investigate that and you can only do it if I say this. they want to introduce a position where the ethics advisor decides exactly which battles he picks. And I'm hearing that they're going to sign off on that now.
We will be back after the break on the subject of ethics with Boris Johnson and what the hell he's up to. In case you hadn't spotted, Boris Johnson is back on TV screens, in newspapers, with his book, Unleashed, which could also maybe be called Untrue or Unethical or Unhinged. I don't know. Any number of titles could be given.
Unforgiven, probably.
Unforgiven. Well, one of the things that
Uninteresting.
One of the things that he has said is that the one thing he regrets is ever for apologising for Partygate. And you think, well, that's a really interesting way of trying to kind of get the love.
I thought about it. I realised I was right all along.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And also,
would you like to make a concession? Yes, the concession I'm able to make after this long period of reflection, my 40 nights in the desert, is that I should never, ever have admitted anything I did was wrong.
And also, I thought the other one, if we're just going to do one more, because I like this one particularly, is that Boris Johnson, having led the Brexit campaign, blames Cameron for not having laid out how Brexit should work. Because I hadn't thought about it.
I think he's got a point on that, actually. I do, because what he means is Cameron literally forbade the civil service from making any contingency plans in the event of a leave vote. Now, okay, the government's position was to remain, so that's fine. He suspended cabinet responsibility. But to do that, in calling a referendum, you have to accept, and he himself has said he thought they might lose, you have to accept that you might lose. And to call a referendum when he himself had put the question and not allow the civil service machine to do any planning whatsoever on what Brexit might look like, I think it's, you can really argue the toss and say that was irresponsible.
You didn't know what Brexit would look like, though, because frankly, nobody had set out
at least
what Brexit would look like.
But
what do you do?
Exactly. So I do think, look, you go back to the SNP campaign for Scottish independence. They had really set out an economic programme of what needed to happen to make the Scottish economy viable in the event of the Scottish people. Did the Leave campaign, apart from giving us taking back control and 350 million for the health service, did they give us anything?
No, but they could have started to work through what the different options had been, and to basically forbid any preparation at all, I think speaks to Cameron's insouciance.
For my money, the most egregious thing is that Boris Johnson is back spouting the same old lies that followed him around when he left. And this may be the champion amongst them when he was speaking to our colleague Nick Ferrari on LBC this morning.
But it's really about an amazing story of how we took back control of our laws properly. And then when Britain got hit by the worst pandemic for a century.
We'll get to that.
I know people always say, well, we'll get to that, so I can't complete this point. Why can't I complete this point?
Go ahead.
People say, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to the vaccine rollout. But then we had the freedom, because of the particular model of Brexit that I had fought for, we had the freedom to vaccinate faster than anybody else. And that saved lives. And the idea that Brexit
So this is not correct. Under European law, let's just state it really clearly here, the UK was permitted to act independently to approve the vaccine in an emergency. He's copying the same phrase that Matt Hancock as Health Secretary used. Because of Brexit, we were able to make a decision to use approve the Pfizer vaccine based on the UK regulator, blah, 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 blah. It is not true. It has always been true that under European law, the UK could act independently to approve the vaccine in emergency. In other words, just spell it out here, the vaccine rollout had nothing to do with Brexit.
Also, by the way, it's not like Europe didn't have a vaccine rollout. I mean, sometimes I remember feeling this in the pandemic, listening to Hancock and Johnson talk. It was almost as if Britain almost uniquely had the vaccine. I mean, what we're talking about here is potentially the difference of a week or two, which, of course,
we did get there first. We did get the first vaccine, and all credit to everyone
the
involved in the
incredible.
Exactly, but don't invoke Brexit to pretend that you did something that saved lives. You didn't. If anything, people around the UK are still struggling with drug supplies as a result result of Brexit.
And indeed, at the time, there were border problems at the time. So it is maddening. He's never properly picked up on it either, and it was always the case. He always would roll it out. But it's very illustrative of Brexit itself, right? If the biggest thing that you can draw on to illustrate its virtues is it's in fact basically a lie, it tells you something.
Okay, so let's go from the kind of some of the mendacity in the book to the purpose of the book. What is Boris doing? Is it part of the comeback tour, or is it, as we know, Boris has wanted to make money for some time and needed to make money? Is this just part of the money-making machine? Is he trying to cause trouble in the Conservative Party?
Doesn't every Prime Minister write a book when they leave?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the thing, isn't it?
And he's a writer. I mean, he actually writes. I mean, he enjoys writing, so it'd be particularly unusual, I suppose, if he didn't.
But so we don't think that he's got ambition still?
Oh, he always does, doesn't he? But he doesn't want to put the work in. I mean, he wants to be anointed. He wants the party to come to him, a grateful, recalcitrant party to come to him and say, Boris, we're terribly sorry about everything. Please come and stand in the leadership.
The timing has to mean something, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, the timing just after the Conservative Party conference, they haven't picked their new leader. I think it's actually really good that he's doing this now, because just when you think, you know, oh my God, of the 4 candidates, and we're going to hear of one of them dropping out late today, you know, but as we record at 1:30, Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, there will be people, you know, kind of around the country or in the party thinking, oh really, is that the offering? Is that all we've got? And then suddenly up he pops and he reminds people why they got rid of him 2 years ago.
But also why they loved him, in terms of Tory members, why they loved him. Because he was vintage himself, wasn't he? In all
he
his
was
interviews.
vintage himself, but was fired by, 60 of his own MPs?
Well, more than that.
Right?
Yeah.
Or 60 resignations, I think there were.
Right,
60 ministerial resignations. That was why he left, and he's back on, kind of really not having moved on from Partygate, which he still, you know, denies and wishes he hadn't apologised for, and trying to sort of convince us or con us that Brexit saved lives. I mean, it's a really reassuring reminder that in that 2.5 years, nothing has changed.
Except that much of the Conservative Party, including, I would imagine, in fact, I'm sure, having been there last week, all the leadership candidates would regurgitate that lie. They would all also say, if they were asked about Brexit and whatever, well, look at what happened with the vaccine rollout. I'm sure all of them would do that. And I think it reminds us as well is that Johnson, we don't know how kind of Johnson's role in the party is going to yet play out. I mean, there is a world where, much as in with Thatcher's defenestration, that kind of the history of it is twisted and mutated over time. In the same way with Thatcher, in the end, it had to become a kind of litmus test. Even to this day, of people saying, you know, Thatcher should never have been pushed out. That was a huge mistake. There was a betrayal, a massive betrayal. And that metastasised within the Tory party, that betrayal narrative, over very many, many years, and infected the Tory party in all sorts of ways. It's entirely possible that the Johnson removal, that there's a similar sort of phenomenon, and he continues to be a sort of process of beatification within the Tory party, rather than everyone actually facing up to the truth, which is the reason the Tory party itself got rid of him is because he had become a crushing liability and he'd lied.
Yeah, if you ask them all individually, privately off record, each of those 4 candidates would say, no chance he could have stayed on.
Correct.
I don't know,
Correct.
maybe not Cleverly.
Yeah, well, he's the closest to him. So.
Closest to him.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing? We will see.
We will see tomorrow, because we're going to get it. And then there were 2.
And then there were 2. Then there will be 2.
Then there will be 2, and it's up to the party to decide. We'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.